My son told me dinner was canceled because his girlfriend had a migraine. 20 minutes later, I drove past his house and saw 8 cars in the driveway. Through the window, I watched my son shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, papers spread across the coffee table, everyone raising glasses in celebration. They were having a party, without me. But it wasn't just any party. It was the kind of gathering that happens when important business gets finalized. The kind where lawyers bring briefcases and everyone looks very, very pleased with themselves. My son had lied to me. But why? I sat in my truck across the street, watching my own family celebrate something I wasn't supposed to know about, something that required my absence to make it perfect. That's when I realized this wasn't about a canceled dinner. This was about me. For 43 years, I'd trusted my son completely. I'd planned to leave him everything, my farm, my savings, the land 4 generations of our family had worked to build. But as I watched him through that window, laughing with strangers who didn't belong in our lives, I understood that trust had been a mistake. Whatever they were celebrating in there, whatever those papers represented, it was happening behind my back for a reason. And if my own son thought he could play games with my future, well, he was about to learn that his 70-year-old father still had a few moves left. What happened next would change everything between us forever. But if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever discovered that family loyalty only goes one way, then you'll understand why I had to do what I did. Stay with me. Because this story isn't just about one family's betrayal. It's about fighting back when the people who claim to love you are the ones trying to destroy you. 20 minutes later, I found myself driving the familiar back road to Malcolm's house. Not because I was suspicious, you understand. I just wanted to drop off the apple pie I'd made for Oscar. At least, that's what I told myself. The Crowhurst land stretches across 85 acres of prime Missouri farmland. My great-grandfather bought it with money saved from working the railroads. My grandfather expanded it. My father built the main house where I still live. And I'd spent 43 years as the county's most trusted veterinarian, building a practice that let me keep every acre intact. Martha and I had always planned to pass it all to Malcolm when the time came, then to Oscar after that. 4 generations of honest work, preserved for the 5th. But standing in that empty kitchen, breathing in the scent of oak furniture and Martha's lavender sachets, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the war, the sense that everything I'd built was under attack. My daily routine had become sacred since Martha passed. Up at 5 to check the cattle, coffee from the same blue cup she'd given me on our 20th anniversary. Breakfast reading the farm report, then out to tend the vegetable garden she'd loved, talking to her as I worked. The house felt too big now, but it was still home, still filled with her paintings of local wildflowers, still echoing with Oscar's laughter from our Saturday afternoon fishing trips to the pond. Malcolm had been struggling since his construction company folded last year. I knew that. But he was my son, and we Crowhurst took care of our own. I'd offered to help with the mortgage on his place, offered to let them move back to the main house until he got back on his feet. He'd refused, said he was handling things. Now, driving past the Miller farm toward Malcolm's subdivision, I was beginning to wonder exactly how he was handling things. Malcolm's driveway held 5 cars I didn't recognize. I parked across the street, behind the Hendersons' mailbox, and studied the house through my windshield. The porch light was on despite the daylight. Through the front window, I could see people moving around the living room, a gathering of some kind. Not a migraine emergency, a party. I counted at least 8 adults inside. Malcolm stood near the fireplace, animated, gesturing with his hands the way he did when he was trying to convince someone of something. Prairie sat on the couch, no signs of any headache, wearing what looked like a new dress. Deep blue, probably expensive. But it was the man by the window that made my blood run cold. Dark suit, leather briefcase, silver hair combed in that particular way lawyers learn in law school. I'd seen enough of them over the years, handling property transfers and estate planning, to recognize the type. This wasn't a social gathering, this was business. I stayed in the truck for 20 minutes, watching. The lawyer, because I was certain that's what he was, opened his briefcase and spread papers across Malcolm's coffee table. Everyone gathered around. There was pointing, nodding, what looked like satisfaction all around. When Prairie hugged the lawyer and Malcolm shook his hand with both of his, I knew I was looking at the conclusion of something. Something that involved paperwork. Something that made everyone very happy. Something that hadn't included me. I drove home slowly, my mind working through possibilities I didn't want to consider. That evening I called Malcolm. "How's Prairie's headache?" "Better, much better. She's resting." I could hear voices in the background. Oscar's laugh. The clink of dishes being cleared. "Good to hear." I was worried. "Dad, about the farm..." Malcolm's voice changed, became careful. "Have you given any more thought to what we discussed? About making things easier on yourself?" We'd never discussed making things easier on myself. We'd discussed his money problems. We'd discussed the possibility of me helping him. We had never discussed me needing help. "I'm not sure what you mean, son." "Just that you're not getting any younger. This place is a lot of work. Maybe it's time to think about simplifying things." The word simplifying hung in the air like a threat. "I suppose that's something to consider," I said, playing the part he seemed to expect. "Though I'm not sure where I'd go." "There are nice places, Dad. Communities for people your age where you could relax, not worry about the land anymore. Communities for people my age. In other words, nursing homes." "I'll think about it," I said. After I hung up, I sat in Martha's chair and studied the room around me. The oak table where we'd eaten thousands of meals. The grandfather clock my father had bought to celebrate my veterinary degree. The photo on the mantel of 4 generations of Crowhurst men standing in the same spot where I'd checked the cattle that morning. Malcolm had never talked about nursing homes before, never suggested I couldn't handle the farm, never used words like simplifying, but he had talked to a lawyer today, and everyone at that meeting had looked very pleased with whatever they'd arranged. I picked up the phone again and dialed Neil Patterson, the attorney who'd handled Martha's estate. If someone was making legal arrangements involving me, it was time I understood exactly what those arrangements were. Neil Patterson arrived at 9 the next morning, briefcase in hand and expression serious. "Roland, I'm glad you called. There's something you need to know." We sat at Martha's oak table while Neil spread out documents, official letterheads, legal terminology that made my chest tight. "Someone filed a petition for emergency conservatorship over you last Friday." The words hit like a physical blow. Conservatorship? It means they're asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent, unable to manage your own affairs. If granted, they'd have complete control over your finances, your property, your medical decisions, everything. I stared at the papers. Malcolm's signature at the bottom, neat and decisive. "The hearing is scheduled for next Monday. They're claiming you've shown signs of cognitive decline, memory loss, poor judgment. They have a doctor's report stating you're a danger to yourself." "What doctor? I haven't seen any doctor except for my annual physical." Neil's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out." He pulled out another document. "There's more. Someone took out a life insurance policy on you 3 months ago. $1.2 million. The beneficiary is listed as Malcolm Crowhurst." The room seemed to tilt. "I never signed any insurance papers." "I know, but someone did, and they used your signature to do it." Neil stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the pasture. "Roland, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you been feeling confused lately? Forgetting things? Having trouble with routine tasks?" My mind is as sharp as it's ever been. That's what I thought. Which means someone is lying to the court about your mental state. And if they succeed... He turned back to face me. "If they succeed, they'll have complete control over your assets, including the farm. And if anything were to happen to you, anything at all, Malcolm would receive over $1 million in insurance money." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The canceled dinner, the lawyer, Malcolm's sudden concern about my simplifying my life. What do we do? Neil closed his briefcase. We fight, but we're going to need evidence, real evidence, because right now, it's your word against theirs, and they have what appears to be medical documentation. After Neil left, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the grandfather clock tick away the minutes. Somewhere in this house was the answer to how my own son had decided I was worth more dead than alive. But first, I needed to understand exactly how far this conspiracy went, and that meant doing something I'd never imagined I'd have to do. I needed to spy on my own family. The plan came to me that afternoon while I was feeding the cattle. If Malcolm thought I was losing my mental capacity, then I'd give him exactly what he expected to see. I'd play the confused old man, ask the right questions, make the right mistakes. And while I was playing that role, I'd gather every piece of evidence I could find. But I needed help. Professional help. I called Reese Coleman, a private investigator I'd met years ago when someone was rustling cattle from farms across the county. Reese was former military police, sharp as a tack, and discreet enough to help without word getting back to Malcolm. "You sure about this, Roland?" Reese asked after I'd explained the situation. "This is your son we're talking about?" "That's exactly why I'm sure." We met at the diner in town the next morning. Reese brought equipment, tiny recording devices, a camera no bigger than a button, and something called a digital audio recorder that could capture conversations from across a room. "First thing we need to do is document your actual mental state," Reese said. "I'm going to arrange for you to see Dr. Sloan Mitchell. She's a psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations. Independent. Honest. If someone's lying about your cognitive abilities, she'll be able to prove it. And then? Then we find out who's been forging your signature, and we figure out exactly how they're planning to get rid of you." The phrase hung between us like a loaded gun. "You really think they'd—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "Roland, someone's planning to steal everything you own and collect over $1 million when you die. What do you think?" That afternoon, I called Malcolm. "Son, I've been thinking about what you said, about simplifying things." "Really?" The eagerness in his voice was unmistakable. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am getting too old for all this responsibility." That's great, Dad. I'm so relieved you're seeing it that way. Would you and Prairie come over for dinner Thursday? I'd like to discuss some options. Maybe you could bring some paperwork. Help me understand what my choices are." "Of course. Absolutely. We'll be there at 6. After I hung up, I looked around the kitchen one more time. By Thursday evening, this room would be wired for sound. Every word Malcolm and Prairie said would be recorded. Every lie documented. And then we'd see who was really losing their mind. Thursday came with unseasonable warmth for early November. I spent the morning preparing Martha's pot roast recipe, the same meal we'd shared every week for 30 years. The kitchen smelled like home, bay leaves and carrots, and the kind of comfort that comes from rituals maintained across decades. But hidden in the grandfather clock's base was Reese's digital recorder. Tucked behind Martha's flower painting hung a camera no bigger than a quarter, and clipped to my shirt pocket was a device that would capture every word spoken in this room. Malcolm and Prairie arrived precisely at 6, and I noted immediately that Prairie was dressed differently than I'd ever seen her. Expensive heels, a designer handbag, jewelry that caught the light when she moved. "Dad, you look good," Malcolm said, embracing me with what felt like genuine affection. "Really good. I've been feeling clearer lately about what needs to be done." We sat down to dinner, and I began my performance. Now, what was I saying about... Oh yes, the farm. It's getting to be too much. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth, as if I'd lost my train of thought. "Prairie, dear, did I already ask you about your headache?" "That was last Sunday, Mr. Crowhurst." "Sunday? Was that recent?" Malcolm and Prairie exchanged a glance I wasn't supposed to catch. "Dad, we brought someone for you to meet. Neil Walsh. He's an attorney who specializes in helping people in your situation." Neil Walsh was the same man I'd seen through Malcolm's window. 50s, silver hair, expensive suit. He shook my hand with practiced sympathy. "Mr. Crowhurst, your son has explained your situation. I understand you're feeling overwhelmed by the responsibilities of maintaining this property. It's so much to remember, I said, allowing my voice to waver slightly. The bills, the insurance, the taxes, sometimes I forget if I've paid them or not. That's perfectly normal for someone your age. The good news is we can take all of that worry off your shoulders. Walsh opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. This is called a power of attorney. It would allow Malcolm to handle all your financial affairs, make sure everything gets paid on time, keep you from having to worry about complicated decisions. I picked up the papers with slightly trembling hands, a tremor I didn't actually have. It looks very official. There's also the matter of your living situation, Prairie added. Malcolm and I have been looking at some beautiful communities, places where you could have friends your own age, activities, professional care if you need it. You mean I'd have to leave the farm? Just temporarily, Malcolm said quickly, until we can figure out the best way to manage everything. I set down the papers and rubbed my temples. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble following all this. Could you explain it again? About the insurance? Walsh leaned forward. What insurance, Mr. Crowhurst? The life insurance. Malcolm mentioned something about life insurance for the farm. Another glance between Malcolm and Prairie. Walsh's eyes narrowed slightly. I think there might be some confusion. No, I remember now. I turned to Malcolm. You said something about insurance, about how the farm would be protected if something happened to me. The room went completely quiet. I could almost hear the recording device in my pocket capturing every second of silence. Dad, you're getting confused again. We never talked about life insurance. Didn't we? I shook my head slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am getting confused. But I wasn't confused about the look that passed between Malcolm and Walsh, or the way Prairie's hand tightened on her wine glass, or how Walsh quickly changed the subject back to power of attorney documents. As the evening progressed, I played my part perfectly, asked the same questions multiple times. Seemed to forget we'd just discussed something, made small mistakes with dates and names, and through it all, I watched them relax, watched them begin to believe their own story about my declining mental state. It wasn't until they were preparing to leave that the real revelation came. The most important thing, Walsh said, gathering his papers, is that we move quickly. The longer we wait, the more complicated things become. How quickly? I asked. Ideally, we'd like to have everything finalized by next week. Next week? I let confusion creep into my voice. That seems very fast. Trust us, Dad, Malcolm said. We know what's best. As I walked them to the door, Prairie lingered behind the others. Mr. Crowhurst, I want you to know that Malcolm and we only want what's best for you. I know, dear. And we want what's best for Oscar, too. You understand that, don't you? Everything we're doing, it's for Oscar's future. And she squeezed my hand with what might have been genuine emotion, or might have been something else entirely. After they left, I sat in the quiet kitchen and replayed the conversation in my mind. They wanted everything finalized by next week. They'd mentioned insurance when they thought I was too confused to remember. And Prairie had brought up Oscar's future in a way that sounded almost like a justification. But it was Malcolm's final words that chilled me most. As he'd hugged me goodbye, he'd whispered, "Don't worry about anything, Dad. After next week, you won't have to worry about anything ever again." The next morning, I received a call that confirmed my worst fears. "Roland, they've moved up the hearing." Neil Patterson's voice was grim. "It's now scheduled for this Friday, 3 days from now." "Can they do that?" "They filed an emergency petition. Claims you're in immediate danger of being taken advantage of by unscrupulous individuals seeking to exploit your condition." The irony was so sharp it cut. "There's more. I've done some research on Neil Walsh. He's not a licensed attorney in Missouri, or anywhere else for that matter. He's a professional con artist with 3 prior convictions for elder fraud." I gripped the phone tighter. "So this is bigger than just Malcolm." "Much bigger. Walsh specializes in targeting elderly property owners. He finds a family member willing to cooperate, usually someone in financial trouble, and they split the proceeds." "How many times has he done this?" "At least 6 that I can prove. And Roland, In 4 of those cases, the elderly person died within 6 months of the conservatorship being granted. The kitchen suddenly felt ice cold. What do? We spring our own trap, but first we need to force them to show their hand. I want you to call Malcolm today. Tell him you've decided to sell the farm immediately and move to Arizona. Tonight. Why? Because if they're planning what I think they're planning, the idea of you leaving before they can complete their scheme will panic them. They'll have to accelerate their timeline, make mistakes. And then we'll be ready for them. I spent the afternoon making calls. Dr. Sloan Mitchell agreed to conduct an emergency competency evaluation. Reese arranged for additional surveillance equipment, and Neil prepared legal documents of our own, papers that would expose everything Malcolm and his accomplices were trying to do. But it was the call to Malcolm that would set everything in motion. Son, I've made a decision. About what, Dad? I'm selling the farm. Tonight. I've got a buyer in Arizona who's willing to take it as is. I'm flying out tomorrow morning to finalize everything. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the line had gone dead. Dad, that's very sudden. Sometimes when you're my age, you realize you don't have time to waste. But we need to talk about this. You can't just... It's already decided. The realtor will be here at 8 tonight to handle the paperwork. Dad, wait. Just wait. Don't sign anything until Prairie and I get there. Why? I thought you wanted me to simplify things. I do, but... Then this is perfect. No more worrying about the farm. No more complicated decisions. I'll send you my new address once I get settled. Dad, please, give us an hour. We'll be right over. After I hung up, I sat in Martha's chair and waited for the trap to spring. They arrived in 43 minutes. Malcolm burst through the kitchen door like a man whose house was on fire. Prairie followed, no longer bothering with the pretense of concern. She looked furious. Dad, you cannot sell this farm tonight. Why not? I thought you wanted me to make things easier. Not like this, not so abruptly. But I tilted my head, playing the confused old man. But yesterday you said I was getting overwhelmed, that I needed help making decisions. Right, but... So I made a decision. Isn't that what you wanted? Prairie stepped forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Crowhurst, you're not thinking clearly. You can't just sell property worth millions to some stranger in Arizona. Millions? I blinked slowly. I thought it was just an old farm. Malcolm and Prairie exchanged a look of pure panic. Dad, sit down. We need to talk. For the next hour, they tried everything. Pleading, logic, emotional manipulation. They brought up Martha's memory, Oscar's future, the family legacy. But underneath their arguments, I could hear the desperation. The fear that their carefully laid plans were crumbling. Finally, Prairie made the call I'd been waiting for. Neil? It's Prairie. We have a problem. He wants to sell tonight. Yes, tonight. No, we can't wait until Friday. She walked into the living room, but the hidden microphone picked up every word. The old man's more stubborn than we thought. What do you mean? What choice do we have? No, I am not comfortable with that. Neil, we agreed this would look natural. When she returned to the kitchen, her composure had completely cracked. Mr. Crowhurst, Malcolm and I have been talking. We think it might be better if you stayed with us tonight, just until you've had more time to think about this Arizona situation. Stay with you? Just for one night, to make sure you're making the right decision. I looked from Prairie to Malcolm, noting how they positioned themselves between me and the door. I suppose that would be all right. Let me just pack a few things. Actually, Dad, why don't you come as you are? We have everything you need. The trap had worked perfectly. They'd shown their hand completely, and every word of it was being recorded by devices they didn't know existed. All right, I said, standing slowly. Just let me get my medication from upstairs. I'll come with you, Malcolm said quickly. That's not necessary, son. I insist. As we climbed the stairs, Malcolm's hand rested on my shoulder with what felt less like affection and more like control. In my bedroom, I made a show of gathering pills from the nightstand while Malcolm watched. But what I was really doing was activating the emergency signal Reese had given me. Help was already on the way. Ready, Dad? Almost. Just need to use the bathroom first. Make it quick. Prairie's anxious to get home. In the bathroom, I looked at myself in the mirror one last time as a man who still believed his son loved him. When I came out, that man would be gone forever. But that was the price of protecting everything Martha and I had built. That was the price of making sure Oscar inherited what was rightfully his. That was the price of justice. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. As Malcolm escorted me toward the kitchen, the front door opened. Neil Patterson entered, followed by Dr. Sloan Mitchell and 2 sheriff's deputies. "What's going on?" Malcolm demanded. "We're here to conduct an emergency competency evaluation," Dr. Mitchell announced. "Mr. Crowhurst, I'm Dr. Mitchell. Your attorney has requested an independent assessment of your mental state." Prairie had gone completely white. "You can't just barge in here." "Actually, we can," Neil said, producing official documents. "These are court orders. Dr. Mitchell is going to evaluate Mr. Crowhurst's cognitive abilities right now, and these officers are here to ensure the process isn't interfered with." For the next 2 hours, Dr. Mitchell put me through a comprehensive mental status examination, memory tests, problem-solving exercises, questions about current events, personal history, and logical reasoning. Malcolm and Prairie sat in stunned silence as I answered every question correctly, demonstrated perfect recall of recent events, and showed no signs whatsoever of cognitive decline. "Mr. Crowhurst," Dr. Mitchell concluded, "based on this evaluation, you show no evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished capacity. Your mental state is completely normal for a man your age." "That's impossible," Prairie whispered. "Is it?" Neil Patterson opened his briefcase. "Because we have some interesting evidence to discuss." He spread documents across Martha's oak table, the same table where, 24 hours earlier, Malcolm had tried to convince me to sign away my rights. First, the medical report filed with the court, claiming Mr. Crowhurst suffers from severe cognitive decline. This report was supposedly written by Dr. Neil Hartman. The problem? Dr. Hartman died 3 years ago. Malcolm's face had gone ashen. Second, the life insurance policy taken out on Mr. Crowhurst's life. The signature on the application doesn't match his actual signature. In fact, it's identical to the signature on the forged power of attorney documents. Neil pulled out more papers. Third, we have the financial records of Neil Walsh, the man posing as an attorney. He's been operating this same scam across 3 states. And Mr. Malcolm Crowhurst, your name appears on several wire transfer records as having received payments from Walsh's organization. "This is insane," Malcolm said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because we also have this." Neil produced a small digital recorder and pressed play. Prairie's voice filled the room. "The old man's more stubborn than we thought. What do you mean? What choice do we have?" "No, I am not comfortable with that. Neil, we agreed this would look natural." The silence that followed was deafening. "There's more," Neil said quietly. "We have recordings of conversations discussing accidents and natural-looking solutions. We have evidence of forged documents, fraudulent insurance applications, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." One of the deputies stepped forward. "Malcolm Crowhurst and Prairie Walsh, you're under arrest." As they read Malcolm his rights, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not shame, not regret, just cold calculation, as if he was trying to figure out how I'd outmaneuvered him. "Dad," he said, as the handcuffs clicked into place, "you don't understand. We needed that money." "For what?" "For Oscar. For his future. The farm, it's just land. But the money could have given him real opportunities." "So you were going to kill me for Oscar's future?" Malcolm didn't answer, but Prairie did. "It would have looked like an accident," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Heart attack brought on by the stress of the conservatorship hearing. Very natural for a man your age." As they led my son away, I felt something die inside my chest. Not grief exactly. More like the final severing of a connection I'd spent 42 years believing was unbreakable. But there was something else too. Relief. And a fierce satisfaction that justice had been served not through violence or revenge, but through patience, evidence, and the quiet application of law. The legal aftermath unfolded over the following months, like a slowly blooming flower of justice. Neil Walsh, it turned out, was wanted in connection with similar schemes in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. His network had targeted dozens of elderly property owners, always following the same pattern: find a financially desperate family member, forge documents, arrange for accidents, and collect insurance money. Malcolm and Prairie were charged with conspiracy, elder abuse, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming: recordings of their conversations, forged signatures, financial records showing payments from Walsh's criminal organization. But perhaps most damning was Prairie's own confession, captured on the hidden recording devices. She detailed their entire plan: use the conservatorship to gain control of my assets, then cause my death through what would appear to be a medication overdose during a moment of confusion. It would have worked, the prosecutor told me during one of our meetings. If you hadn't been so careful about gathering evidence, they probably would have gotten away with it. Malcolm pled guilty to avoid a trial. 15 years in federal prison. Prairie, who had previous convictions for fraud, received 20 years. Walsh got life without parole. Throughout the legal proceedings, Malcolm never once apologized, never showed remorse. During his sentencing hearing, when the judge asked if he had anything to say, he simply stated, "I was trying to secure my son's future." Even in the end, he couldn't see what he'd really done. He couldn't see that he'd been willing to destroy Oscar's grandfather to secure money that would have been tainted with murder. But Oscar, 8-year-old Oscar with his grandfather's eyes and his great-grandmother's stubborn streak, understood more than any of us expected. "Grandpa," he said during one of our fishing trips to the pond, "Daddy did something bad, didn't he?" "Yes, Oscar, he did." "Are you sad?" I thought about that question for a long time. Was I sad, or was I something else entirely? "I'm sad that your daddy made bad choices, but I'm not sad that we stopped him from making worse ones." Oscar nodded solemnly. "Mama Martha would have been proud of you." Out of the mouths of babes. 6 months after Malcolm's sentencing, I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, preparing breakfast for Oscar and myself. The boy spent weekends with me now, his legal guardian, after Prairie's parents proved unable to care for him. The oak table still bore the ring stains from thousands of coffee cups shared with Martha. The grandfather clock still chimed on the hour, but everything else had changed in ways both subtle and profound. I'd established the Martha Crowhurst Memorial Fund, a scholarship program for rural children who wanted to pursue veterinary medicine. The fund was endowed with money from the sale of the back 40 acres, land I no longer needed, turned into opportunity for kids like Oscar. I'd also updated my will with Neil Patterson's help. The farm would remain in trust for Oscar until his 25th birthday, managed by an independent trustee to ensure it could never again become the target of family greed. But the most important change was harder to define. For 42 years, I'd believed that family loyalty meant trusting without question. I'd believed that love meant assuming the best, even when evidence suggested otherwise. What Malcolm taught me was different. He taught me that real love, the kind worth having, requires vigilance. It requires being willing to protect what matters, even from those we love most. He taught me that sometimes the people who claim to care about your future are the ones most willing to destroy it. And he taught me that justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it comes not through violence or revenge, but through patience, preparation, and the careful application of law. This wasn't about rage. This was never about rage. This was about reclamation, about taking back what was mine and preserving it for someone who would value it properly. Oscar would inherit the farm someday, but more than that, he'd inherit the knowledge that his grandfather fought for his future when it mattered most. That when faced with betrayal from his own blood, his grandfather chose justice over vengeance, evidence over emotion. That's a legacy worth preserving. As I finished telling this story, Oscar is in the barn, helping me feed the cattle before school. At 9 now, he's tall for his age, with Martha's green eyes and a steadiness that reminds me of my own father. He asks questions about everything: why the cattle prefer certain parts of the pasture, how we know when it's time to plant the corn, what makes some years harder than others for farming families. But he never asks about his father, never asks why Malcolm isn't coming home. Some wounds heal better when you don't keep picking at them. Last week, Oscar found Martha's old recipe box in the kitchen and asked if we could try making her famous apple pie. As we worked together, measuring flour and rolling dough, I realized that this was what Malcolm had been willing to destroy. Not just money, not just property. This. The connection between generations. The passing down of knowledge and tradition and love that doesn't come with conditions attached. Malcolm saw the farm as assets to be liquidated. Oscar sees it as a place where his great-great-grandfather's cattle still graze the same pastures, where his great-grandmother's roses still bloom every spring, where his grandfather still gets up before dawn to check the fences, just as 4 generations of Crowhurst men did before him. That's the difference between greed and inheritance, between taking and receiving. If you know someone who might be facing what I faced, if you recognize the warning signs of financial elder abuse, share this story. Help them understand that they don't have to face it alone, that there are lawyers like Neil Patterson and investigators like Reese Coleman who specialize in protecting people like us. But most importantly, help them understand that fighting back isn't about anger or revenge. It's about protecting what you've built for the people who will truly value it. It's about reclamation, not rage. And sometimes that makes all the difference.